13. Welcome to the Holistic Kid Show. My name is Zane.
My name's Imad.
And I'm Noah.
We're the Holistic Kids, here to educate us kids from the inside out. A new study adds to evidence that severe obesity is becoming more common in young U.S. children.
50% of teens are overweight or obese.
This is one of the biggest issues in our time.
So what can we do to lower the risk? Is it all related to food?
Well, we have an amazing guest here today to talk exactly about that. Jenna's extensive experience as an academic and health advocate led her to founding a Million Marker in 2019, shortly after completing a postdoctoral fellowship with Stanford University School of Medicine. Jenna holds a BS in nutrition and an MPH and PhD in environmental health science from UC Berkeley. Thank you so much for joining us today.
We would love to know your story.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Us too.
So we would love to know your story. Like, how did you get here where you are?
Wow, it's a long, winded road to get to where I am today. So I was trained as you mentioned that I have a BS in nutrition. So I was trained as a dietitian. After undergrad, I was working as a dietitian in a hospital. I realized nobody listens to me. When you wanted to change people's dietary habit, telling them what to eat, what not to eat, people don't really listen. So I was really frustrated by that. I figured, okay, if nobody's listening to me, I better go back to school and study something else. So at the time, I was thinking if I can actually change people's environment, particularly food environment, if I can control, there's no fast food out there, there's no processed food where people can buy those food, then I don't have to tell people what to do. So I went back to school and studied environmental health. That's what I did for my master and PhD. And after that, I was getting frustrated again because the field I was studying is called environmental epidemiology. That means we're studying the patterns of disease. We study the patterns of the environment. So when I was studying food environment, I was looking at distribution of where stores are. Like, say, for example, near your home, what kind of stores and restaurant do you have? And how does that influence your dietary choice, your food choices? And how does that influence your obesity risk? But I was frustrated because I was only studying the patterns. I'm not really changing people's behavior, right? So if you think about like what you eat, it's all very individual based. Like you would eat something different than other people. You would shop at this shop versus the other shop. So there isn't really a way for me to intervene, like to change people's behavior. So I went to Stanford, did a postdoc in exactly learning how do I actually change people's behavior. And then when I got there, after my postdoc, I was frustrated again because it feels like it's still not enough. Because in order to change people's behavior, you have to figure out, what kind of information can I give it to people in order for them to change their behavior, right? You and I are like super different. Like we have different genetics, we have different lifestyle, and environmental exposures the environment plays a huge role in everything we do, our health risk and everything. So there isn't really like a personalized way to tell us exactly, what my exposures are, what kind of environment I'm exposed to. So I was getting a little frustrated about that because I felt that information is really critical in giving to people and changing their behavior. That's why I figured, okay, since, as an academic, you publish papers. So I figured since nobody's reading my papers anyway, like before, nobody was listening to me, I should do something different. That's why I started a Million Marker, to be able to offering people tools to really facilitate this behavior change process and also promote safer products and also giving people more environmental health related information. There you go. Sorry, long-winded answer.
As I said in the intro, 50% of teens are obese or overweight. That's a lot of kids.
That is a lot of kids, yeah.
Very. Why are kids getting bigger and bigger? What is going on?
So there are many factors. If you think about it, like obesity is becoming obese. It's actually not that simple. There are many factors contribute to obesity, right? One of the really important factor that we just talked a little bit is the food environment. So what you energy in versus energy out, right? Like how much do you actually eat and what do you eat? So that's one factor. The second factor is on the environmental side, right? It influences what you eat. So if you have a ton of like fast food restaurant there, you have no way of shop for, you know, fresh vegetables and fruits, then you're going to be eating the fast food, right? So if you think about what's in the fast food, you're talking about high calorie, right? A lot of calorie in there. And then you could have like food additives and you could have preservatives and you can have other things. Those chemicals also contribute to, you know, obesity. And this is just on the food. Now this is energy in, right? So if you think about energy out, how do you like spend your energy? A lot of us, you know, if you go exercise, you would have spent, if you sweat, right? Then you would like spend a lot of energy. But if you think about our overall environment, in some neighborhood, kids might not actually have the opportunity to go out exercise. So if they hear like outside is all like, they hear like firearm, they hear guns, if there's crime, it would be unsafe for them to go out, right? So then they end up like stuck at home. And what do you do when you're stuck at home? You watch TV, right? So if you eat a lot of in those areas, right? Like if you eat a lot of fast food and you're not going out to exercise, you just sit at home and watch TV. And many times, actually, a lot of TV ads are targeted at kids, specifically sell them candies and processed food. So you can see there are all these factors influencing how a kid would eat and exercise, right? So these are some of the factors. And then in addition to that, talking about our internal physiology, right? You have the fast food coming in, you're not exercising. There's a lot of chemicals additive in those fast food. Those chemicals, which is, we're probably going to talk a little bit about that, is these chemicals are altering how your body is making fat cells, store fat cells, changing your metabolism, messing up your hormones. Then you just get, you know, a lot of factors on top of each other causing kids to getting fat.
So was it the same when you were growing up as a kid?
Much different. So when I was growing up as a kid, I think we don't have as much fast food. Like we don't have as much processed food. Like I didn't remember growing up as having a ton of packaged food or snacks. Like when I was growing up, like those are more like a treat. Like very occasionally you have a treat. So most of the time that you have snack, as you know, you have fruits. Also, maybe our parents are not as stressed and our parents always cooked at home. Because one thing in the US we also have found in like research is that people tend to eat out a lot. So if you eat out a lot, you have a lot of takeout food, and then you eat a lot more packaged food, then you have way less time cooking at home. Then you have way less control over what you actually put in your mouth, right? So all those factors also contribute. But when I was growing up, my parents cooked almost like every meal. We rarely ate out. And I used to bike to school. So I grew up in China. So I didn't come to States until high school. So before high school, I was like biking every day to school, you know, like there's no cars. But if you look at like now, like Chinese kids in China, the obesity rate is actually almost as the same as US. And people always like, okay, for Asian kids, you know, what happened? And part of the reason was because people started buying cars and then kids stopped like biking to school and more processed food. And then kids start eating, you know, more and more McDonald's and KFCs, and then went to China. And then so they started eating. So you can see this whole like upward trend because of these environmental changes and also social changes that causing kids to get fat.
What are some of the things that you recommend for us to do at home to prevent obesity from happening?
Oh, many things. Okay, let's start with the easy but also harder ones. Number one is avoid processed food, packaged food. So if you think about packaged food, I mentioned earlier, right? So not only they're ultra processed, the reason we're having like these ultra processed food from the very beginning is to actually increase the shelf life of foods. So that means they can store longer. But in order to store longer, it needs to process. That means the nutrition content of that food have decreased so much. So if you get a ton of, vitamins and minerals in fresh fruits and vegetables, you wouldn't get it in processed food. So the nutritional value decreases. And in order to process the food, a lot of additives are added, like preservatives. And some of the natural preservatives are like, oil. If you deep fry something, that can last a little bit longer. Or if you add a lot of salt in it, it could last a little bit longer. But oftentimes we add a lot of additive, like as chemicals, harmful chemicals, actually into the food to make it last longer. So a lot of these exist in processed food. So not only are you getting more calories, you're getting also a lot of unnecessary chemicals that could mess up with your body in those processed food. So that's number one. I would say avoid processed food. That's number one, right? So if you avoid processed food and you want a snack, you should always go to fresh fruits or fresh vegetables. That would be the best. And if you can have access to organic fresh fruits and vegetables, then that's another level up. That's better, because the reason being is I mentioned about the additives in processed food, right? Same as fresh fruits and vegetables. Many times for conventional fresh fruits and vegetables, we actually spray them with pesticides. Pesticides are sometimes, we call this category of chemical called hormone disrupting chemicals or endocrine disrupting chemicals. That means these chemicals actually mess with your hormone system. And if you think back, like, what does your hormones do? They're like signaling molecules like in your body. So they send signal from your brain to your mouth. It controls like how much you would eat. It controls how your body is gonna, process these food, store energy, everything. So you never ever want your hormone to be like imbalanced, like out of whack, right? So when you eat a lot of these food, not only you have the extra calorie, it also influences your hormone system. So that's why you want to definitely avoid. And if you can, try to eat organic, right? Food is number one. And then the second is exercise, right? So let's just go in energy out. So make sure you have some exercise during the day, and moving is better than not moving. And it's the same for you and for your parents, everyone, pretty much everyone alive. You need to exercise. So by sweating, you're spending calories. And then that's another way kids should do. And it's also, if you like play a lot of video games, it's also not good for your vision, not good for your back. It's not good for your development. So I would say that's like number 2 that kids should do. And then number 3 is you probably should get enough sleep. I know like these days that, if you have to go to a lot of after school classes and then you have activity here and there, and making sure you have enough exercise, enough sleep, that's also really important. And lastly, also comes to food and also water, is if you can use a water filter at home, also tell your parents to use a water filter, because there's also a lot of chemicals, harmful stuff in water. So do that. It's also really good. And then very last is try to avoid plastic. Because again, going back to the chemical, is that plastic actually have a ton of chemicals in them. So anything that packaged in plastic, try to reduce that, and also reduce the use of plastic or touching plastic. So those are some strategies. And this is not only you're decreasing your exposure to potential chemicals that increases obesity, like rates and then incidence and exposure, you're also kind of help saving the environment too. And I know a lot of kids these days, you probably learn about, climate change at school, right? So plastic is actually a huge portion of how we can reduce our chemical footprint and climate footprint.
Cool.
That is really cool.
How do you plan on changing kids' eating and exercise habits to try to minimize obesity?
How do I plan on changing that? I think I can't do it alone. I think we need you guys, right? We need you guys. I think one of the most important thing we need to do is to educate kids. So making kids become aware, like what's actually contributing to obesity, like what do they need to aware? Because I think knowledge is power. Many times people don't even have the knowledge. So we really have to equip people with the knowledge, with the tools, so they can do something about it. So I think that's really, really important. And then the second is I also related to education. I felt that our school system needs to focus more on education, focus more on nutritional education, physical activity education, all of these. So it all comes down. I think that's like the most important, sort of more on the bigger picture side. And if you're at home, and I think if your parents are not aware, you really need to make sure your parents are aware also these factors, what contributes to these things. And these factors actually not just apply to kids, it also apply to them. It's applied to your entire family. And why we want to like really want kids to know and wanting parents to know is that something in science we call developmental timing. That means the younger you are, the more exposure you have to these things, the more potential impact it could have on your body, because these things, they accumulate. Right? For chemicals, we're talking about, for exposure, we talk about they accumulate. So it's not going to kill you tomorrow. You might not feel any difference, but you don't really know that 20 years later, what's going to happen. So if you're not, as kids, if you don't pay attention on your health, and if you keep putting bad stuff in you, right, the cup's going to get full. So by the time you get to your 20, 30, 40s, disease will show up, especially chronic disease will show up. And by that time, you might not feel good. You might not have a good quality of life. You might not feel as happy. So that's just not cool. And we want to like start doing it when we're young, so then we're doing the prevention. So by the time when we grow old, then we don't have these problems.
Yeah, because a lot of kids, they don't really understand that what they eat matters. Like people are like, oh, I'm just a kid, I can eat whatever I want. Well, the thing is, when you grow older, like you said, it's going to become more of an issue. So if you start these habits today, it will really affect your future.
Totally agree.
So we are more and more exposed to toxins today than ever before. Could toxins play a role in getting kids gaining weight?
Oh, absolutely. So I mentioned it before, these additives and pesticides, there are many, many toxins and out there, and we should definitely avoid. When it comes to obesity, we actually put this group of toxins, we call them obesogens. So obesity, obesogens, that means these toxins are actually causing some ways or changing the obesity like development metabolisms and all these things. So obesogen usually works in several ways. One is they could be like increasing your fat cell production, and they could also increase your fat storage, and then increase your metabolism of storing more calories. So these are how these kind of obesogen toxins would work. Some examples, some common these obesogens, they actually exist in plastics. That's why I mentioned one of the way for kids to become aware is use less plastic. So one of the, we call it poster child of endocrine disrupting chemical, hormone disrupting chemical, or obesogen. You guys might even heard of it. It's called BPA. So many people see these, like they would say like a BPA free water bottle. You could see also BPA free canned food. So next time you go shop with your parents, like pay attention on those like BPA free labels. So BPA is like this poster child for hormone disrupting chemicals. It actually mimics estrogen. So estrogen is like the female hormone, but it also exists in men. It has a lot to do with your fat metabolism. So what BPA does is that it mimics estrogen. So when you have exposure to these BPA chemicals, that your body wouldn't know what to do with your existing chemicals. And then what we have seen is that BPA actually increases fat cell production. And then if you think about it, if you have more fat cells, the fat cell will wants to store more fat, right? And then it's going to send a signal to your brain to tell you, okay, I need to like store more fat. I need to eat more fat. Then your brain will be eating. So you have this whole cascade, like downstream, like kind of like domino effects. So if you have this, all these things will happen. That's why you really want to avoid it. So one way to avoid BPA is making sure, okay, don't drink out of a plastic bottle, don't drink bottled water. Like that's just not good, especially like if that bottle is like baked in the sun. So temperature actually increases release of these chemicals. So we also tell people like don't ever microwave plastic, because for the same thing. So if you microwave plastic, if you eat TV dinners, all these chemicals are getting into your food, and then you're gonna eat it, and then your body's gonna think your body is gonna make more fat cells, and then you're gonna be storing more. So the whole cascade. So we definitely want to avoid these things.
Cool. Around the world, in many different countries, the amount of plastic that's building up is building just so fast.
Mhm.
How do you think this is going to affect the planet as a whole?
It's very gloomy to talk about that. It's definitely impacting the global economy, the environment, and everything. I think all of you might have seen that, you know, seabird when they died, people find a lot of plastic in their belly, and that's have seen in whales. And then there's also the specific like garbage patch. It's literally miles long of garbage. It's like it's pretty scary. So if you think about it, that if we use a lot of plastic, it gets into the environment, and for now there, when you throw it out, it's pretty big. Like it's not gonna, but then as it goes through the environment, ocean, it actually breaks it down. So as you mentioned, then we have these issues called problem with microplastic. That means they're like 5 microns, like so small, sometimes you can't even see with your eyes. And these gas break down. And then when they're so small, they can be dispersed in the air. You breathe, you get that exposure, it gets into your food, it gets into everything. So, and then it gets into your body. So now we already find like a microplastic in people's blood, in people's like poop, in people's like, deep lungs. And what's really problematic with these small kind of like these like small pieces of plastic, is that if you think about what's actually in the plastic, remember I mentioned earlier that plastic could be like thousands of chemicals. So one of the 2 major chemicals used in plastic, one of them is BPA, which I just mentioned. They could make up to 80% of the plastic weight, right? So if you have these small chemical, like small pieces of plastic, like, going to your body and doing other things, then these small pieces of plastic are carrying these chemicals I just mentioned about, right? And if it gets in your body, it's almost like you're eating it. Then it's going to cause this whole cascade of issues. So not only it's like bad for the environment, bad for the animals, it's also bad for the human body. It's very, very problematic. So that's why we really want to reduce.
You talked about hormone disrupting chemicals. Pesticides are one type of toxin that can disrupt our hormones. What are others that can mess up our hormones?
So pesticides is a big one. BPA I just mentioned. Another one that often happens a lot, and people gets a lot exposure, and that's also I think one of the really important one that you can actually do something about it. Is this chemical called phthalates. So it's this chemical, contrary to BPA. So BPA using plastic is BPA actually makes plastic shatterproof. This clear plastic, hard clear plastic, they could have BPA. Phthalates on the other side, when they're using plastic, it's actually making plastic really flexible. So think about that saran wrap, like some flexible plastic. A lot of time they would have phthalates in it. Phthalates actually blocks testosterone. Testosterone occurs a lot in men, and also in women, but really, really important for men, right? So phthalates blocks testosterone, and it could really change a lot of things in boys, in men, as well as women. And they actually occur, a lot of them, besides being used in plastic, they're actually being used in a lot of personal care products. Think about your shampoo, your lotion. If they actually have like something smells really good, have fragrance in that shampoo or lotion, if it's not labeled as in, they're from a natural source or something, a lot of time that they're probably made of phthalates. So basically, by choosing a fragrance-free, no smell shampoo or conditioners or other personal care product, you're actually avoiding that exposure.
Everything is covered in plastic. Our fruit touches plastic. Our beef jerky in the plastic. When we are out of the water bottles are plastic. What can we do to start lower use of plastic today?
Many ways you could do. So, for example, if you don't buy packaged even fruits and veggies, you go to a farmer's market. You could bring your own grocery storage bag, right? That you can avoid. For other beef and other things, I think those are harder unless you go to a butcher directly. That's really hard. So I think this is where that you kind of have to think about it. You don't want to be too stressed out. You do what you can. So just making sure at home you're not using a lot of plastic. Many times I think with shopping, it's really, really hard.
Yeah, because everything nowadays is all covered like plastic, and it's kind of insane because plastic is not making the world
Better.
There's like you said, it's filled with microplastics, and microplastics can only hurt us, not help us.
As you said before, advertisements are specifically targeting kids. How are advertisements evolving and changing the way kids think and how people operate?
Oh my God, this is a really big topic. So the reason we really don't want these ads to target kids is that your brain is actually not fully developed until you're 13 or even older or even 18, right? So many times kids don't really have a good way to make judgment about what's actually selling to you. So you couldn't make, and you also might not have the the health knowledge. I mean, even adults today, right? Adults gets to see advertisement. There are advertisement to adults too. Many times it's really hard to make that judgment, what's good and what's not. And for kids, it's even harder. And what advertisers and these say processed food companies, what they have done is they've done a ton of research to figure out what kids actually like, what colors they like. So or maybe with their favorite cartoon, and using these to target kids to sell more fast food or to sell more processed food, which is really problematic. And even for some, big chain supermarket, if you go to a supermarket, if you go to the cashier, many times they will be selling, chocolate candies by the cashier. And for some kids, supposedly kids friendly store, they will even make this level of product showing at kids level, because kids are not as tall as adults, right? They will show at the kids level, so kids will see it, and then they will buy it, or they will push their parents, or they will pressure their parents to buy it for them.
Yeah, they scream and cry until the parent buys it, and that's really, really, really bad.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jenna, everyone. Make sure to follow Dr. Jenna today. Let's recap Dr. Jenna's key points.
When you are young, you may feel the effects of a bad lifestyle, but when you're older, you're gonna really feel it. So start these habits today. Avoid packaged foods and unprocessed foods. These foods have decreased nutritional content, and in order to process the foods, there are a lot of preservatives and additives as harmful into the foods to make them last longer. So avoid the processed foods.
If you want a snack, go to fresh fruits and veggies. Organic is best as pesticides are hormone disruptor chemicals that can mess with your hormones. 3. Make sure to get enough movement and optimize sleep.
Get a water filter and avoid plastic. Lower anything that is touching plastic. Make sure to get educated. Become aware of what is leading to obesity. Knowledge is power, after all. Our school system needs to know more about nutritional education.
Make sure your parents are aware of these factors. And obesogens are all over. Plastic is really bad for the body, environment, and it's not making the world a better place. It's best to get rid of and use natural ingredients and fragrance-free personal care products to limit these chemicals.
We know that it can be overwhelming, but remember, educate yourself and do what you can.
Wow, Dr. Jenna, that was amazing. We are so thankful for your wisdom and time today.
Thank you everyone for tuning in. And until next time, I'm Zia Ansari.
I'm Imad.
And I'm Noah.
Follow my family and I on social media, a holistic mom D, and look out for our mom's book. She's working on book 8, and I'm doing the illustrations, and we're also working a book. So stay tuned.
Kids need to learn from other kids. Please download our podcast on iTunes and leave a review so other kids and families can benefit. We need to work together to create a healthier future for all of us and the planet. Join us next week for another episode of the Holistic Kids Show, where kids are empowering kids. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you, everyone.